The nameplate on her desk read, Manager, but everyone in the crowded Chicago soup kitchen simply called her ma'am or nodded respectfully when she passed. She had insisted on anonymity for so long that even the volunteers, who had worked alongside her for years, didn't know her real name. To them, she was just the woman who showed up every morning at 5 a.m., unlocked the doors, and stayed until the last hungry soul had been fed. The woman who paid for groceries out of her own pocket when donations ran short. The woman who knew exactly how. Marcus liked his coffee, black with 2 sugars, and remembered that Sarah's daughter had a piano recital coming up. What they didn't know was that she was dying. Elena Martinez had received the diagnosis 3 months ago. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. 6 months, maybe less, the doctor had said with the practiced gentleness of someone who delivered this news too often. She had sat in that sterile office, staring at the diplomas on the wall, and felt something unexpected. Relief. Not because she wanted to die, but because now she had a deadline. A finite amount of time to figure out how to leave something meaningful behind. The irony wasn't lost on her that she had spent 42 years trying to disappear, and now she desperately wanted to be remembered. Elena had started volunteering at St. Catherine's Community Kitchen 7 years ago, shortly after her divorce. She'd been looking for something to fill the hollow space that had opened up in her chest, something to make her feel useful again. What started as twice-weekly shifts had gradually consumed her entire existence. She organized food drives, coordinated with local restaurants for surplus meals, and somehow always managed to stretch their meager budget to feed everyone who walked through their doors. But she had always insisted on staying in the background. No photos for the newsletter, no interviews with local news stations, no recognition ceremonies. She had built an invisible wall between herself and the world, and now that wall felt like a prison. The morning everything changed started like any other. Elena arrived at the kitchen to find Marcus, a Vietnam veteran with weathered hands and kind eyes, already waiting by the door. He'd been homeless for 3 years, ever since his disability check stopped coming regularly, but he never missed a morning at St. Catherine's, not because he needed the food, though he did, but because he helped. Elena set up chairs and tables, a routine that gave structure to both their days. "Morning, ma'am," he said, tipping his worn baseball cap. "Good morning, Marcus." Coffee's already brewing. They worked in comfortable silence, arranging the dining area for the 100-plus people they'd serve that day. Elena moved more slowly than usual, the cancer gnawing at her energy. But Marcus didn't comment. He was perceptive enough to notice, kind enough not to pry. By 7 a.m., the volunteers started arriving. There was Janet, a retired teacher who had been coming for 5 years. David and Lisa, college students who coordinated their class schedules around their shifts. And Father Mike, who insisted he wasn't officially affiliated with the kitchen but showed up, religiously anyway. They all nodded to Elena with the easy familiarity of a well-functioning family, each taking their positions without needing instruction. The morning rush was typical. Construction workers grabbing coffee and sandwiches before their shifts, families with young children who spoke in whispers, embarrassed by their need but grateful for the kindness. Elderly people who came as much for the companionship as the food. Elena moved among them all, refilling coffee, checking if anyone needed seconds, listening to fragments of stories she'd heard dozens of times before. It was around 10 a.m. when Sarah walked in, and Elena immediately knew something was wrong. Sarah was 19, a single mother working 2 jobs, while taking evening classes at the community college. She brought her 4-year-old daughter, Mia, to the kitchen sometimes, and Elena always made sure there were extra portions for them to take home. Sarah had pride, too much of it. Elena often thought, and accepting help never came easily to her. Today, Sarah's eyes were red-rimmed, and she kept checking her phone, with the frantic energy of someone expecting terrible news. "Everything okay, honey?" Elena asked, approaching Sarah's table where she sat with barely touched oatmeal. Sarah looked up, and for a moment, Elena saw herself at that age, overwhelmed, exhausted, trying to hold everything together with sheer willpower. "My landlord," Sarah said quietly. "He's evicting us. Raised the rent by $400. Says it's a market adjustment. I don't know what I'm going to do. Mia starts pre-K next month, and I can't move her now. But I can't afford..." She trailed off, staring at her phone again. Elena felt something crack open in her chest. She had been saving money for months, not really knowing what for. Her own expenses had always been minimal. She lived in a small apartment, drove an old Honda, spent most of her free time at the kitchen. The diagnosis had made her even more frugal. What was the point of buying things she wouldn't live to use? But now she knew exactly what the money was for. "How much do you need?" Elena asked. Sarah's head snapped up. "Oh, no, ma'am, I wasn't asking for—" "How much?" "$1,200 for first month and deposit, but I couldn't possibly—" "Can you meet me here tomorrow morning? Before we open?" Sarah studied Elena's face, seeing something there that made her nod slowly. "Yes, but why?" "Because sometimes the universe puts people in each other's path for a reason," Elena said, surprising herself with the words. "And maybe it's time I stopped being so invisible." That night, Elena sat in her apartment with a legal pad, making lists. She had $30,000 in savings, money she'd been setting, aside for a retirement she'd never see. Tomorrow, she would give Sarah enough to secure her apartment and cover rent for 6 months. But that was just the beginning. She thought about Marcus, who slept in his car when the shelters were full. About Janet, who had mentioned her husband's medical bills were overwhelming. About David and Lisa, drowning in student debt but still showing up to volunteer every week. About Father Mike, who had quietly mentioned that the church's food pantry was empty. Elena had spent 7 years watching people struggle, offering what comfort she could within the confines of serving breakfast, and lending an ear. But now, with time running out, she realized she could do more, so much more. The next few weeks blurred together in a whirlwind of activity. Elena paid Sarah's rent and secretly arranged for a scholarship fund at the community college. She found Marcus a room in a boarding house and paid 6 months in advance. She covered Janet's husband's next round of medical treatments. She purchased new equipment for the kitchen and established an endowment to keep it running. But the more she gave away, the more she realized that money was only part of what she had to offer. Elena began sharing stories. She told Marcus about her own struggles with depression after her divorce, how the kitchen had saved her as much as she'd helped it. She talked to Sarah about navigating college as a single mother. Elena had done the same thing 20 years earlier. She opened up to Janet about the loneliness that came with getting older, the fear that her life hadn't mattered. For the first time in years, Elena let people see her, really see her. The transformation was gradual but unmistakable. The woman who had always deflected attention began accepting hugs from regular visitors. She started joining conversations instead of just listening. When a local news station wanted to do a story about the kitchen's increased community impact, she agreed to be interviewed. "What changed?" the reporter asked, noting how others spoke about Elena with something approaching reverence. Elena glanced around the kitchen, watching Marcus help a new volunteer learn the coffee system, seeing Sarah at a corner table helping Mia with coloring books while they waited for the bus to pre-K. "I realized that hiding doesn't protect anyone," she said, "and that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is letting them know they're not alone." The story aired on a Thursday evening. By Friday morning, donations had poured in from across the city. By the following week, volunteers were showing up in numbers they'd never seen before. People brought their children, their parents, their friends. The kitchen, once a quiet haven for the city's forgotten, became a bustling community center. Treatments were helping, but the cancer was aggressive. But her spirit soared as she watched the ripple effects of her decision to step into the light. Marcus had started a support group for homeless veterans. Sarah was tutoring other young mothers. Janet organized a monthly potluck that brought together people who had never spoken outside the kitchen walls. On a crisp October morning, exactly 6 months after her diagnosis, Elena sat in the same doctor's office, where her world had first tilted sideways. Dr. Peterson studied her latest scans with a puzzled expression. "I don't understand," he said finally. "The tumors are shrinking significantly. This level of improvement, it's rare, but it happens sometimes. We call them miracle cases." Elena smiled, thinking of Marcus's laugh when she'd told him a terrible joke that morning, of Sarah's excitement about making Dean's List, of the way the kitchen now buzzed with the energy of people who had found their place in the world. "Maybe," she said, Or maybe when you finally start living, your body remembers how to fight. 2 years later, Elena still arrives at St. Catherine's Community Kitchen every morning at 5 a.m. The nameplate on her desk now reads, Elena Martinez, Director, and the walls are covered with photos of the hundreds of people whose lives intersect within those walls. She still insists that everyone just call her Elena, but now it's because names matter, and she wants them to know hers. The woman who once tried so hard to disappear has become the heart of a community that proves every single day that kindness multiplies when it's shared openly, that sometimes the best way to save yourself is to let others know they're worth saving too. And every morning, when Marcus tips his cap and says, "Good morning, Elena," she remembers that being seen, really seen, isn't something to fear. It's something to celebrate.